reframe these things as not left-right, but about citizens versus corporations. If that's our frame, and the corporations are claiming massive constitutional protections that usurp and overwhelm our constitutional protections. And the history is very clear. It can be laid out in an hour or two, right? We have the vast majority of Americans on side already. Just look at the response in the polls to Citizens United in January of 2010. There were a lot of national polls in the corporate media. Overwhelming opposition to Citizens United. Republicans opposed the decision by 75%. Independents by 80%. Democrats by 85%. Overwhelming opposition to more power for corporations. That's where we have to be mobilizing. It's a very different framework than environmental regulatory organizing. We don't even see in this movement as corporations as the enemy. We don't call this an anti-corporate movement. We call it an anti-corporate rights movement. Corporations were chartered as our subordinate tools, right? Literally in our workshops, we talk about the proper relationship between we the people and our corporate creations as the relationship between me and my toaster. I'm not exaggerating. That's absurd, right? But that's the proper historical relationship post-American Revolution. That's the relationship that was established. There's something very powerful there to use. Exxon is not a Goliath up there. Exxon is a toaster. I know it sounds crazy, right? So a lot of the problem is our thought forms are all screwed up, right? Our thought forms give corporations all this power. What if we withdrew that consent? What if we started treating corporations as our subordinate? What if we started imagining that the problem is that we've allowed rights to be given to legal fictions, right? We're not trying to make the legal fiction accountable. We need to strip the corporate veil away and hold the people in charge accountable, right? It's common sense if you think about it, right? We need to depersonify the corporation, and we need to personify the people in charge of the corporation. Okay? That's part of our culture shift work that we need to be doing. So just to finish up, just 2 or 3 more minutes on what has been happening in this growing movement. So we're up to 130 communities. I'm starting to not remember all the states. I need to write them down. So ordinances, 80 ordinances in Pennsylvania, and another 50 in Maine, New Hampshire, New York, Massachusetts, and in addition to that, there are campaigns established with draft ordinances already written in this state, in both Spokane and Bellingham, in California, in Shasta Lake City, first one, little village next to Shasta, city of Mount Shasta, little village next to the mountain, in Ohio, and in Colorado. There are the beginnings of ordinances in all of those communities, but they've been passed in the 6 states I mentioned. Spokane, I'm going to tell you just a tiny bit more. In Bellingham, I helped to start a campaign 2 years ago, which is weeks from launching a public campaign. How many people are aware of the coal trains issue that's becoming big, right? It's been in your papers, right? So I'm not going to put time into describing what the coal train issue is, other than that we're now begging our elected and regulatory officials to try to stop these thousands and thousands of new coal cars from passing through our communities every day for the next decades on their way to China. Everybody's in every community is focusing on pleading with elected officials. That's our colonized mind. Bellingham is about to launch an ordinance campaign in the next few weeks that would ban coal trains from passing through Bellingham. Period. It's called the Right to Climate Ordinance. It's an ordinance that gives Bellingham residents the right to a stable climate. And they say in the ordinance, the people of Bellingham have been waiting for a long time for state and federal governments to do something bold about the climate crisis. We're done waiting. We're taking it into our own hands. We understand that in Bellingham, we have self-governing authority. So we will be blocking, under law, we will be blocking coal trains passing through our city. Okay? It's a very different paradigm. Now let me be clear. All of these ordinances violate corporate rights. So you will hear over and over, all of these ordinances are illegal. All of these ordinances are unconstitutional. That's what you'll hear, and they are. But what it really means is they violate corporate constitutional rights. That's really the only significant thing that's illegal about it. There's citizens standing up saying, we don't recognize corporate rights. We cannot govern ourselves when we recognize corporate rights. Okay? And then Spokane is the last very interesting example. How many people are following what happened in Spokane on Election Day? You guys aware of it? So 5 years ago, labor groups, environmental groups, religious groups, and neighborhood associations started meeting together, a couple dozen organizations, to create a community bill of rights using this model for the city of Spokane. So it was a different model. This is not prohibiting a particular legal corporate activity at all. This is just a community bill of rights that enshrines the rights of people and the rights of nature and strips corporate rights. So here's, and 2 years ago, 2 Novembers ago, they did a massive amount of organizing, and they won 25% of the vote for an 11-point Bill of Rights that was massively opposed by developer interests. Every politician opposed it. Every business association opposed it. Vicious response against it. 25% of the vote. Now, short-term activists would say, oh, well, we tried. Let's go on with the next issue. These folks said, wow, we just tried to pass something that no one's ever seen anything like this before, and a quarter of the population voted yes. That's really cool. Let's take a break and start again. So it was on the ballot last week in Spokane on Election Day, and it lost by 0.75%. They're almost there. Next year, or 2 years from now, it'll be on the ballot again, and they'll win. Here's what it is. It's a 4-point Bill of Rights. They brought it from 11 to 4 to make it a lot simpler. 1, neighborhoods by majority vote shall have the right to veto commercial and industrial developments in their neighborhoods if they require a zoning change. Right now, corporations without a zoning change have the rights of property holders as if they were persons. They can do anything they want on property they hold. 2, the Spokane River and its aquifer shall be considered as beings with constitutional rights. The rights of nature in place in this bill. And let me say, because I tend to forget this, 3 dozen of the 130 communities ordinances include rights of nature. 3 dozen. And you read this stuff and you go, that sounds like something the Green Party would have put into law. These are being passed in conservative farm communities in Pennsylvania. Right? This is not left-right. We just have to get out of that. This is not ideological organizing. This is people versus corporations. This is the right of self-government versus corporate constitutional rights. So, Spokane River and Aquifer, recognized rights. 3, working people, when they pass the threshold into their workplace, shall maintain all of their Bill of Rights protections. I don't know if you know this, but workers shelve all of their constitutional rights as soon as they go to work every day. You have no free speech rights, rights against search and seizure, property rights, etc. You shelve them all under existing conventional labor laws. That would end in Spokane. And 4, any corporate constitutional rights that interfere in the implementation of those first 3 rights shall be nullified.
How did it not pass?
Seriously?
I mean, a 3-year-old can figure that out.
Because it's still pretty revolutionary. Again, massive opposition from $600,000 spent by mostly East Coast developer interests. That's a lot of money from far away for a local ordinance, $600,000. Every local politician once again opposed. Every business association once again opposed. But unlike 2 years ago, when individuals mostly hid or ran away, massive long list of endorsing individuals and organizations. And I'm sure that the Occupy movement has had a lot to do with that, because there's been some serious culture shifting going on in the last few months across the country. So, I mean, I don't know what their argument is for why they did so well, but the organizers, well, Kai is the lead organizer, he was here. He's the head of that campaign. And Kai, I'm on his kind of internal listserv, and they were expecting a 30 or 40% win. You know, they were expecting maybe 40%. They weren't expecting to almost win. They were stunned. 35? Yeah. They knew they would do better. With 38,000 votes counted on election night, they were 89 votes behind. It's an exciting day in Cienfuegos. It's an exciting week in Cienfuegos.
Pittsburgh's ordinance they've written up.
So Pittsburgh has 2 draft ordinances they're now looking at. One is a toxic trespass ordinance, which puts personal liability, criminal personal liability, on individuals or institutions that can be proven to have participated in that toxic ending up in my land, my water, or my body. Right? Bringing it back to personal accountability for toxics. And the Sustainable Energy Ordinance, very interesting ordinance that I have right here. And I want to read you just a couple sentences from it. It's an ordinance that guarantees sustainable energy access to all residents of Pittsburgh. I have no idea if it will pass yet. It's just in discussion form at this point. But really, what an amazing development. They legally define sustainable, ordinances, laws all have legal definitions in them. That's always a section. Their definition of sustainable energy development and production includes this language in the definition, that it can only be, so I'll read you the whole thing. Sustainable energy development and production, as a definition, shall mean the development and production of energy from renewable fuel sources, which decreases the use of energy produced from fossil fuel and nuclear energy sources within the municipality, which is controlled by democratic decision-making within the community over its development, production, and use. In other words, if the decision-making over the production isn't democratic, the definition doesn't even call that sustainable energy production. And that's really interesting, and which does not interfere with the rights of nature, ecosystems, and communities. 4-page ordinance that's anybody can read and understand everywhere. That's up for discussion in Pittsburgh. So this is a model that is blasting through a lot of the stuck places that we've been in for a century. And I really want to urge people to contemplate the question, what do we want in Olympia? What do we want in Cienfuegos? What do we want in your nearby communities? Or what do we want in Thurston County? Because these could be county ordinances too. It's a big question. Obviously, you need a majority vote, either of your elected representatives or of the populace, right? Big question. What do we need? And there are so many corporate crises around us that are increasingly seen by us as normal, right? I mean, we have a foreclosure crisis. We have 8 million people or something in the US who've lost their homes. And another 8 or 10 million are anticipated to lose their homes still before this crisis is over. That's an emergency. Right? You could pass an ordinance that bans any further bank foreclosures unless certain very specific requirements are met by banks. You could say, not here anymore. We're taking that power away from you. You could do something on health care, right? That's become normal, right? We don't even think of that as an emergency. I mean, we think of it, we know it's out there. But I hear so many, especially in kind of white privileged communities that I speak to, which is most of the communities I speak to, people say, well, Pittsburgh had this urgency. We don't have any emergencies here. I hear that a lot. Be sure that when you mean that, you're not forgetting all of the things that are called normal in our existing culture. So, I mean, that is my presentation. And I really appreciate having such a great group. I will take questions for as long as people have
We
questions.
have a local emergency.
Cynthia, could you help with that?
We have a local
You can.
emergency. Ours
Now, I have
locally-
some help with hands, but from someone who has some facilitation background at all.
do it.
I can't do that and what I'm doing.
Our
Anybody who has some facilitation experience at all? You can. Could somebody come up here and help? Okay, because it's more than one person can do. Okay, yeah.
Our local issue is that we in the county, in Thurston County, are being bombarded with a group called Stop Thurston. that
And talk to
is-
everybody, let's talk to everybody.
We are being overwhelmed by Koch brothers' money in a move against the critical areas ordinance in the Thurston County area. You may have seen a few of these signs, Stop Thurston, kind of a bloody Thurston County design. It's very big money. They have one fellow who has full-time paid position to fight the county on its required ordinance revision called critical areas ordinance. Their long-term agenda is to get less liberal county commissioners. Right now, we have commissioners.
Try to be really brief, because there's a lot of people who want
Okay,
to,
so
yeah,
no, I think
just to get
the
that out as
question
an
really,
option.
that's the background. The question is, how does one turn that around and make it possible to say something about the critical areas ordinance, that it has to go forward?
We have the authority as the citizens of each community to write an ordinance that prohibits any kind of harm, corporate or otherwise, that we see fit. Now, the work is to write it in such a way that you can build a majority response. But there is no right and wrong answer about how you write it, right? Selden will work with any community that's ready to pass an ordinance, and they will help you draft an ordinance based on what you're trying to focus on, what the issues are here. But there is no right or wrong here. It's just you figure out what issues are the most urgent for you, and you pull together an ordinance. So I can't give you a specific reply.
The gentleman with the glasses,
I'm gonna let Zoltan go first.
Oh, go
My
ahead.
question just went right out of my head.
they both have glasses.
Actually, mine is somewhat similar in that oftentimes we hear about local control in the anti-environmental context,
Yes.
like the Shulk Brigades in Nye County, Nevada, and sometimes local powers
Yes.
can be twisted around, or to take like an anti-immigrant or anti-gay
Yeah.
position. How do we prevent ideas of local control from being hijacked in that way?
Yeah.
Or are there creative, counterintuitive ways of working with some of the angry people on a local level?
Really important question. So the movement that I'm associated with, the understanding of what we want to be putting forward is that we need to get to a place in the legal paradigm where we allow the state and federal governments to set floors rather than to set ceilings on rights. Right now, in many cases, higher levels of governments set a ceiling on our right to defend ourselves at the local level, or set a ceiling on rights for people. And so there is actually no way that I'm aware of to stop a group from doing exactly the same thing, and using it to take rights away that are existing for human beings. But our movement is very explicit that the education that we're trying to do is to help people understand, and there are lots of examples in recent law. For example, California under Bush Jr. tried to pass for many years stronger clean air legislation, forcing car companies to have an average car that produces a lot less exhaust. And the federal government kept preempting its right to have stronger air quality protection laws. So we need to flip that around. We're not objecting to higher levels of government setting standards. We're objecting to them setting ceilings. We need to demand that they set floors. Does that make sense? You understand my use of those words? That's the best I can do to answer that.
Go ahead with the glasses. The gentleman.
You were basically left off at, you said it was called phase 2.
Oh, yes.
The community
networking, and then I'm wondering
To
how
take
you're
on the states.
framing phase 3.
Right, the final phase, which to me is like, wow, I mean, I'm sad to say that piece is pie in the sky to me because it looks so far away, but who knows how fast a movement like this could catch on, is that once we have a bunch of Pennsylvanias that have rewritten their state constitutions, that those states start doing exactly the same thing as locals were doing. And phase 3 is state networks that are taking on fundamental constitutional reform of the US Constitution. That's how we get to federal constitutional reform. That revoking personhood as an amendment is simply insufficient for all of the legal structures that are in place. You know, a constitutional amendment that's just about stripping all corporate rights, that would be really exciting. But again, I don't think we can get there through a bunch of non-binding resolutions at the local level and maybe some non-binding state legislature resolutions. And that somehow we think that we're then going to pass federal constitutional amendments. I mean, the women's movement built power to get as far as they got. And I don't see us building power yet anywhere. I don't even see us building power other than in Pennsylvania at the municipal level. You know, 80 towns have passed these in one major city in one state. I mean, they've built real political power. They did their work. And now they're mobilizing up. And I think grassroots organizing is always upwards. I don't think you start up here in the sky and work there or work down. I don't think that's how organizing works, in my experience.
Go ahead, Peggy.
Okay, this is a quickie. I'm just thinking about trying to wrap my mind around the state preemption thing and the examples of local control. And I'm thinking of things like dry counties and counties that refuse to go on daylight saving time. These things that are old that I grew up with, that sort of old-timey people cherished and did. And as far as I know, they're still, of course, how do those relate to this?
It's a really interesting question. I have no clue. I don't know. I mean, I know that there still are some really strange and interesting local laws, and I don't know the connection. Yeah. The folks, like my primary mentors in this work are the folks in the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund. Thomas Lindsay is the founding director. He's an attorney. If you go to their website, you'll see you can click on speeches and interviews with him. You can send emails to their organization and they'll respond. They're a 6 or 8 person paid staff.
And that's Kai too, right?
And Kai is one of them.
Kai who is.
He is their sole, well, Mari Margul and Thomas Lindsay. He's the leading director, and Mari is an associate director. They've both been living in Spokane for the last 3 or 4 years, doing full-time support work for the campaign there, which, by the way, is envisionspokane.org. envisionspokane.org is how you find out more about the Spokane
Can you
initiative.
send out some of these links to us from your?
Yeah, you will get a whole bunch of links to articles, interviews, speeches by a number of people, and you'll get links to all the relevant organizations in the country doing this work, which is a short list, sadly, still.
Gentleman in the baseball cap.
Yeah. I find these really helpful signs. I think that's great news. But I wanted to know how you would respond to those of us who believe that we don't have the decades that it will take for this to actually have meaningful and lasting effect.
Yeah.
I'm one of those guys who was pulled off of the radical revolutionary idea by the hope that Occupy gave me. And so I set aside those ideas to see whether a peaceful revolution could actually take place. But environmentally and in basic human rights, I don't believe that we have the decades that this would take.
That's my gut instinct also. And yet at the same time, my gut instinct is that even if it's already too late, let's say to reverse climate change or to fundamentally shift sustainability issues in the nation or whatever, we're going to collapse. We're going to collapse sooner or we're going to collapse later. And the question to me is, what's the nature of the collapse? Is it as democratically organized and coordinated as possible, so that as few people are suffering as possible, and we're not in, or are we going to end up in a civil war? right, as the resources disappear. So I would say,
My
even if
belief
it's
is
too
that
late,
the sooner the
I want to be in a
collapse,
collapse
the better,
that is as peaceful and democratic and organized and coordinated and facilitated and meeting as many needs as possible as we go down. And this movement is that, we build that.
Okay, 2 more questions, go ahead.
Would you say that, like markets, like the system of markets has been conflict?
Can you talk louder so people can hear you?
Would you say that like the system of markets, like as an economic organization, has been like intertwined with how corporations are sort of convince people to give up their rights? And I guess what I'm thinking of is all the people buying the Olympia. And also, like, my question is like, you know, in building communities and spreading this knowledge, like, how do you suggest we reach out to people that might not already be, you know, knowledgeable enough to be willing to come to a house party about corporate personhood? And in that, like, you know, how would you tailor, like, you know, strategies to at Walmart to like teach people not to shop at Walmart because of X, Y, and Z reasons, or kind of tie into this,
This-
you know, this
Okay, you
mode?
got a
Please
lot of
stop,
questions, yeah.
Because I can't
Okay, the
answer
end.
all of those in just a couple minutes. But, well, first, corporations didn't convince anyone to do what they're doing. We were forced to do what we're doing, right? I mean, you know, I forget what the movie's called, End of the Line or something, the movie about how General Motors.
Taken for a ride.
Taken for a ride, thank you. This is, write down and find in the video store Taken for a Ride, documentary about how General Motors Corporation and 2 tire corporations conspired, their leaders conspired to get rid of 70 urban streetcar systems in the United States, state-of-the-art public transit systems, and replace them with GM buses and GM cars and tires made by the corporations that had been part of this conspiracy.
And they all ran on Standard Oil.
Taken for a ride, and more recently, Who Built the Electric Car has
Right.
some of these qualities as well. But, you know, I'm actually somebody of the belief that that people don't consume the way they consume because of free will, right? I mean, in the McDonald's libel trial decades ago in the United Kingdom, there's another film of libel, very interesting, to think about how corporate culture influences consumer behavior. The vice president for marketing of McDonald's UK on the witness stand under oath said, if we didn't advertise, no one would buy our food. That's an exact quote, right? So let's not overemphasize how addicted people are once we strip corporations of their First Amendment rights, because they're advertising as commercial free speech rights of a person, right? So again, if we stop thinking of consumer action as our only option, and we start understanding that the corporations that sell stuff to us are as powerful as they are because we've allowed them to have free speech and other rights of a person, and we start stripping those rights away, that the corporate culture, consumer culture can be shifted very, very rapidly. And I actually don't remember some of the questions that you've asked, so once you come back when we're officially done, and we
I
can keep
was
chatting.
gonna about end it here. We have one more question, and then I have a question.
Okay.
You seem to have an idea or a direction that you want to go with. I came here because I heard you on Chaos, and actually I'm somewhat disappointed at the turnout. I thought
Do you have
there'd
a
be a whole lot
question?
more people, but that's okay. Have you considered putting together 1, 2, 3, here's what we want, not too much, not too little, and then sending it to every single county in the United States to start with, you know, something simple, like, I don't know, think of something simple.
Well, I would put it back in your lap. I mean, it's not up for a group of folks in this movement to decide what Olympia wants or needs.
It's not just Olympia, I mean, the wants.
Every
the
community
wants-
has its
the
own
wa-
issues.
Well, I think we'd all be in agreement that there are at least 3 things that every single county in the United States has in common that they'd like to get rid of. Because the corruption runs deep, and there's so much, people can't even identify with their one thing. You know, it's just so
I
much.
don't actually, I wouldn't even agree with you that corruption runs deep. Almost all the stuff we call corruption is legal.
Well, whatever,
You know,
okay,
so
so
it's not actually technically corruption.
it's language, it's a question of language, and because in our heart of hearts, and the law that doesn't need to be taught, that we're born with, we know that there's something wrong. But you seem to be going in a certain direction, and what caught my ear on the radio was, you said, instead of pleading with our elected officials, yeah, and it's right, I mean, I'm not being represented.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, I'd like you seem to have an idea on a certain model. Could you put together something, a generic something or
No, I
other?
couldn't, and I couldn't and I wouldn't, because this has to be grassroots uprising, community by community. That's the only way that it makes any sense to me and my colleagues, is communities have to educate themselves about what their constitutional rights are in terms of exercising their right of self-government. And then they need to be working together in majority to figure out what the biggest issues are in their community, and they can choose, and we hope they do, to frame it around stripping corporations of their rights and enshrining the community's right to
So nothing's in
XYZ.
position for Olympia right now?
What's that?
Nothing's in position for Olympia?
There's no Olympia group yet. It's not for me living in Portland to set up an Olympia Olympics.
Well, we
I
can
wouldn't
look
have
at
a clue.
Spokane.
And that's a
What your
good
issues are.
segue into my question, which is what next? What do we do next? And maybe Molly wants to address that, or Paul, do you
No, go ahead, you
have
two.
advice?
And I'll be here till 5 if we want to just continue a
Maybe it's a
conversation. So
workshop.
if you want to leave, feel free to leave, but we'll keep chatting until 5.
What I would offer is this, all that I know is that we had something called a matrix, I think Jackie called it a matrix decision-making tool for our community to look at which corporations would be allowed into the community. It's an interesting document. I've had it for years. Tom Lindsay told me that he thought it was one of the most powerful tools he's yet seen developed for a community. And Jackie probably wrote that close to 10 years ago. And part of it was getting people interested in coming to meetings and following through. So there's a handful of us who've been doing this for about 10 years.
When's your next meeting?
Is Jackie here?
No, she's
Because I've
not.
never met her, but I've had phone calls with her over the years.
So at the next meeting, we meet the first Thursday of each month, and that will continue. And if you all are interested, we are growing. There's about
Where do you meet?
Where do you mean?
Mix 96 conference room.
At what time?
We meet at 6:30 the first Thursday of each month. So we are going to get together, and we're going to be doing some critique of some of what is going on with Move to Amend. The interesting thing is that while clearly these folks have had a falling out with the Move to Amend group,
It's not really a falling out, it's just that there's no
Just-
coordination going on.
right, there is.
Yeah, we're
but what's
looking for
interesting-
public dialogue around this.
all of the successes are every single one of them, all the East Coast
Yeah.
cities, those are all, it's all self-absorbed.
That's right.
And the thing, so I knew right away that I could see, because of the research I did, that communities on the East Coast have really taken a strong lead in doing this by getting into the rights.
Can you email,
Okay, so we've got a really good email list here.
Can you-
We've got a really good
well,
email.
can you
And
send-
I'm wondering, do we have everyone's permission here?
Yeah.
To
yeah,
give it to Paul and to keep it local too, so that, okay, good. Because it actually all looks very legible too.
Well, it sounds like Molly should
It's a good list.
Yeah, so if you give it to me, I'll email you the whole list in the next day or
It's a
two.
good
Well, if we
list.
had
And we'll have
We
it
should
all.
go from there.
Yeah.
Tell me who give me the 1 or 2 email addresses of who I'm emailing it to. Because I don't think necessarily everyone wants everyone's email list. People are somewhat picky about the public.
We'll send an email to you all, and then you can opt in if you want to follow this up and keep going with it, or if you're don't want to do that, just let us know.
Also, Kai said we can have a democracy school here, and it'll come on a Friday, 2 hours, and all day Saturday, we may have it as little as $35. I'll put this here, put your name and email and phone number if you want to be notified when we do that, and we are going to do it. Because we need this ordinance here in Olympia, and they know how to help us draft it.
I think that is.
Yeah. And I lead, just FYI, I lead a two-day workshop that's about 70% crossover with Kai's, with Seldov's Democracy School. It's longer, also not expensive. I'm amazed he's giving me such a great deal. Sometimes these things cost thousands of dollars. And
Would you please talk with Kai about
yeah, or maybe we could
Get it.
we could meld our workshops into something, I don't know. But their workshops are tremendous legal and historical pieces. And what's hard for me about them, having gone to a few of them, is that they are almost entirely lecture questions. And I have much of that same history in mind, but I add some feelings work in small groups to help us feel how we're feeling living in corporate culture, because we're not just a bunch of heads on sticks in the room doing this work. And I also do a lot of corporate culture kind of decolonization work in my workshops.
I would like
So
for
it'd be
us,
interesting for maybe he and I to figure out how to meld those two.
and I would like for us to send to you, both of you,
Yeah.
what it is we're looking for. I raised a question that I'm really weary of a whole bunch of corporate constitutional law, and I think more interactive is
Yeah.
gonna look a lot better. So let us give you some, both.
Yeah, so talk to us both and something will come out of that, yeah. That will serve you. Does anybody else still want to say or ask something about this work?
I'd like to say something. What I heard in reaction to all of this was the governor of Pennsylvania, all of this, pro-people, stripping corporate rights from the drilling companies to the gas companies. He appointed a former, I guess he was a former official, maybe a PR person from one of the gas companies as his director of mineral rights. So that was the reaction to the people saying no more fracking. And so there's going to be a pushback.
Absolutely there is.
So that's,
And I should also say that there are beginning to be local municipal ordinances that are fracking bans within the zoning and regulatory structure, interestingly enough. And those are being struck down very quickly by courts. So it's starting to get a little more complicated to figure out what's going on with local ordinances around fracking. Because some communities, elected officials are starting to believe that zoning law gives them the right to say no. And they're doing that. These are not rights-based ordinances. They don't contain the language that I'm talking about. And they're being rapidly struck down. So you've got to pay close attention. The rights-based ordinances have not been attacked yet by any corporate lawyers or state legislatures at the local level. So yes, it's getting complicated fast to be following this stuff. And by the way, Pittsburgh is not the only town that's passed a rights-based fracking ban. Half a dozen smaller communities in 2 or 3 states have followed. They were the first. There's some Maryland and other Pennsylvania communities that have done exactly the same thing as Pittsburgh. Yeah.
Just want to say real
Yes.
quick, I feel like as our right to self-governance has gone away, so is our right to organize ourselves, and community organizing. We see that as being something that has to be mandated from bond or something like, I increasingly see organizing as governance, and that really changed my mood because of you.
Yeah, I don't know what you mean by organizing is becoming illegal, because that's not true. Could be. But I really urge you to think about community organizing towards governance, not community organizing towards regulatory, dealing with one regulatory amendment. Yeah. But yeah, governance is where, that's the issue here. Who's in charge? That's the issue we have to start addressing. We, the people of Olympia, are corporations. we the people of Olympia or state and federal government telling us we're not allowed to pass laws that protect us here in Olympia.
We just voted in a new mayor and at least three new council members, and I'll tell you, we have, golden opportunity, golden, in light of the last election.
Awesome.
And I'm really excited about it. Well, we have a great discussion too, but county issues, but we've got.
Oh, yeah.
So, and also undercarriage.
So if anybody still wants to make a donation towards my work, or if you haven't signed thing, you'll get a big comprehensive email from me that will invite you to sign up for my blog so that you can get more emails. Thank you all.
I may look like I'm role modeling here, but I'm actually giving Paul payment towards a whole bunch of books that we got from Paul for Media Island. And we hope people consider Media Island a good repository for having really kick-ass books that wake people up.
An amazing library.
And
Check them out.
We have it all.
Awesome. 3 more months taken care of.
Your email address works.
And if people want to keep chatting over dinner or whatever, let's just keep chatting.
We're